The storm came faster than anyone expected. Dark clouds rolled over the quiet town, swallowing the afternoon sun until the sky turned gray. Linda Parker glanced through the kitchen window, watching trees bend in the wind. Her husband, Robert, had left for a business trip to Chicago that morning, and the big house already felt too silent. Only the sound of the storm and the soft laughter of her 8-year-old grandson, Ethan, filled the air. He was staying with her for a week while his parents vacationed in Florida, when thunder cracked across the sky. Ethan ran into the kitchen, his small hands clutching his stuffed bear. "Grandma, I'm scared," he whispered. His voice trembled and his wide blue eyes searched hers for safety. Linda smiled gently and pulled him close. "It's all right, sweetheart," she said, brushing his blonde hair away from his forehead. But the lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The refrigerator hummed to silence. The only sound left was rain hammering against the roof. Linda took a deep breath. She wasn't afraid of storms, but she didn't like the thought of staying in a dark house with a frightened child. The air felt heavy, the rooms too big, too cold. She remembered a small hotel by the lake, the Maplewood Inn, where she and Robert had stayed years ago. It was quiet, safe, and always warm inside. She made a quick decision. "Ethan, get your jacket," she said. "We're going on a little adventure." Within minutes, they were in her car, driving through sheets of rain. The windshield wipers moved back and forth like the rhythm of her heartbeat. The storm raged around them, but inside the car it felt like a tiny bubble of calm. Ethan sat in the back seat, eyes wide as lightning flashed outside. Linda tried to keep her voice light as she said, "We'll stay somewhere nice tonight. You'll see, 'Til be cozy." When they finally pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Maplewood Inn, relief washed over her. The sign glowed warmly through the rain, and lights flickered in the lobby windows. She parked close to the entrance and hurried Ethan inside. The moment they stepped through the doors, they were greeted by the scent of wood polish and the soft crackle of a fireplace. The lobby was decorated in warm tones, deep reds, dark wood, and golden lamps. It felt like stepping into another world, safe from the storm outside. A young man behind the front desk looked up and smiled. His name tag read Daniel. "Rough night out there?" he said kindly, handing Linda a towel. "You picked the right place to hide from it." Linda returned the smile, brushing the rain from her coat. "Yes, I thought it would be better than sitting in the dark with a scared little boy." Daniel glanced down at Ethan, who was clinging to Linda's hand. "We've got a nice room on the second floor. Warm blankets, quiet view of the lake. You'll like it." He handed her an old-fashioned brass key attached to a wooden tag. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but grateful. As they walked down the hallway toward their room, Linda noticed how calm the hotel felt. The storm still raged outside, but here it was only a faint echo muffled by thick walls. Their room was simple but welcoming. 2 beds, a small window, and the faint smell of cedar from the furniture. Ethan jumped onto one of the beds, hugging his bear. "I like it here," he said brightly. Linda smiled, finally feeling her shoulders relax. She turned on the small lamp beside the bed, and a warm golden light filled the room. The rain against the window made a soft rhythm, almost like music. She helped Ethan change into his pajamas and tucked him under the blankets. "Try to sleep, honey," she whispered. "The storm will pass soon." Within minutes, Ethan's eyes fluttered shut, breathing slow and peaceful. Linda sat quietly by the window, watching the storm sweep across the lake. The world outside was blurred with rain, yet somehow it looked beautiful. The reflections of lightning rippled across the water like quicksilver. She wrapped her cardigan tighter and sighed. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd felt peaceful like this. Life had become a cycle of routines. Meals, chores, empty conversations. Robert was a good man, but he was always busy, always somewhere else in his thoughts. They had shared so much once late-night talks, laughter over morning coffee, but now silence had replaced it as she stared out at the storm. A knock came at the door, soft but clear. For a moment, she hesitated. Who could it be this late? She opened the door just a crack. Daniel stood there, holding a small tray. "Sorry to disturb you," he said with an easy smile. "The kitchen's closing soon, and I thought you might like some tea." It helps people sleep during storms. Linda blinked, surprised by the gesture. That's very kind of you, she said, opening the door wider. He stepped in carefully, trying not to wake Ethan, and set the tray on the table near the window. Steam curled from 2 cups of chamomile tea, the smell soothing and familiar. You've got a brave little guy, he said, nodding toward Ethan. Most kids cry through a storm like this. It's had a long day, Linda replied, smiling faintly. But he'll be fine. Thank you for this, really. Daniel shrugged lightly. My mother used to make tea whenever the lights went out, he said. She said it made the world feel less scary. His voice carried a softness, a warmth that filled the small room. They spoke quietly for a few minutes about the weather, about how long she'd lived in town, about little things that didn't seem important but somehow eased the silence. When he laughed, it reminded her of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Connection. It was gentle, human, and fleeting. When he finally left, the door clicked softly behind him. Linda sat for a while, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. Outside, the thunder rolled away into the distance. The storm was ending, but her heart still beat faster than usual. She looked at Ethan, sleeping peacefully, and smiled. Then she turned back to the window. The lake shimmered faintly in the flashes of distant lightning. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet stir, not of attraction, but of awareness. She had been invisible for so long, lost in her routines, forgotten in her own life. But tonight, a stranger's simple kindness had reminded her that she was still there. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew that this night, this small, stormy moment, had touched something in her that she thought was long gone. Linda took a sip of the cooling tea and whispered softly to herself, maybe it's not too late to feel alive again. And with that thought, she finally turned off the lamp, listening to the soft hum of rain against the glass as she drifted to sleep, unaware that this quiet night at the Maplewood Inn would change the way she looked at her life forever. Morning came quietly. The storm had finally passed, leaving the air fresh and the sky a soft blue-gray. Sunlight peeked through the curtains, laying warm stripes across the hotel room floor. Linda woke to the sound of birds outside the window and the gentle hum of the heater. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw Ethan still sleeping peacefully beside his stuffed bear. And it all came back. The storm, the drive, the cozy hotel, and the young man who had brought her tea the night before. She smiled faintly, thinking of his kindness. It had been years since a stranger had looked at her and seen more than just a grandmother or a wife. There had been no hidden meaning, no wrong intent, just simple warmth. Still, the memory lingered longer than she expected. She shook it off, whispering to herself, it was just a nice gesture. Nothing more. After breakfast with Ethan, pancakes and orange juice from the hotel cafe, Linda decided to take him for a short walk around the lobby before heading back to their room. The storm had left puddles glistening on the pavement outside, and through the big glass doors the lake shimmered under the pale morning light. Ethan pressed his little hands against the window, fascinated by how calm the water looked now. See, Grandma, he said, his voice bright. The storm's gone. It is, she replied, smiling at his excitement. And look how beautiful it made everything. Just then, Daniel appeared from behind the reception desk. He looked cheerful, wearing a clean white shirt with his name tag pinned neatly. Good morning, he greeted them warmly. You both survived the night, I see. Ethan giggled. The thunder was really loud, but Grandma said brave people drink tea and wait for the morning. Daniel laughed softly. Sounds like your grandma knows how to handle a storm. He glanced at Linda, his eyes kind. How did you sleep? Better than I expected, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Thank you again for the tea last night. That was very thoughtful. It's what we do here, he said lightly, but his smile lingered a second longer than usual. Would you like some fresh coffee? We just brewed a new pot. Before she could answer, Ethan tugged her hand. Can I get hot chocolate, Grandma? Linda looked down at him, amused. All right, but just one. So they sat in the lounge near the fireplace. Ethan sipped his hot chocolate, his nose wrinkling every time the steam touched his face. Daniel brought Linda a cup of coffee and a small plate of biscuits. He didn't rush off right away. Instead, he leaned against the counter nearby, talking with her as if time didn't matter. He asked about her grandson, about how long she had lived in town, about the storm. Their conversation was light at first, but slowly it deepened. Linda found herself telling him little things she rarely mentioned. How quiet the house had become since her children grew up, how Robert worked longer hours now and talked less. She didn't complain. She just spoke honestly. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression calm and genuine. "I guess that's how life goes," she said softly. "People grow and things change. Sometimes it feels like I blinked and 20 years disappeared." Daniel nodded. "My mother used to say that too. She always said we spend half our lives waiting for something to change and the other half wondering where the time went." Linda smiled faintly. "Your mother sounds wise." "She was," he said, then paused, looking down. "She passed away 2 years ago." "Oh?" Linda said quietly. "I'm so sorry." He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "She loved this place. I took the job here to feel close to her somehow. The lake, the quiet nights, it reminds me of her." There was something about the way he said it, not sad, just truthful, that stirred something in Linda. She felt an ache in her chest, the kind that comes when you recognize a shared loneliness. Before she could reply, Ethan spilled a bit of chocolate on his sleeve, and Linda quickly reached for napkins. Daniel helped, grabbing a few from the counter, and together they cleaned up the little mess, laughing softly. For a brief moment, it felt like they were part of the same world, two people and a child, just existing in a calm, ordinary morning. When Ethan ran off to look at the fish tank near the lobby, Daniel looked at Linda and said, "You know, you have a very kind way of looking at people. It's rare." She blinked, a little surprised. "I'm not sure about that. I just try to be polite." He shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You really see people when you talk to them. Most don't." The words caught her off guard. No one had said something like that to her in years, not even Robert. She felt a faint warmth rise to her cheeks. "That's kind of you to say," she murmured. He smiled, then stood straight. "I should get back to work. Enjoy the rest of your morning." As he walked away, she watched him for a second, then quickly turned her gaze toward Ethan. Her heart felt strange, not in a romantic way, but in a way that reminded her she was still capable of feeling something new, something human. Later that day, when she and Ethan returned to their room, the sky was bright again. She packed their things slowly, though she knew they'd leave by afternoon. Ethan was busy drawing on hotel stationery with the pen Daniel had given him. On the paper, he drew the lake, the rain, and a little house with smoke curling from the chimney. Linda sat beside him, helping him color the water. "You're quite the artist," she said. "Daniel said the lake looks like glass when the sun comes out," Ethan said. "Do you think he's right?" She looked out the window where sunlight sparkled over the calm water. "I think he's very right." When they went to check out, Daniel was at the desk again. Ethan ran ahead and handed him the drawing. "This is for you," he said proudly, "so you don't forget us." Daniel crouched down to accept it. "Thank you, buddy. I'll put it right here." He pointed to a small corkboard behind the counter, already filled with little notes and pictures from guests. Then he turned to Linda, his expression gentle. "It was really nice meeting you both. I hope the next storm you face is only a small one." She smiled. "Thank you, Daniel. You've been very kind." He handed her something, a small wooden keychain shaped like a maple leaf. "A souvenir," he said softly. "For luck." She hesitated before taking it. The smooth wood felt warm in her hand. "That's lovely. I'll keep it." As she and Ethan walked out of the inn, the door closing behind them, Linda felt a quiet heaviness in her chest. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because the world had reminded her of something simple, yet powerful, that even in ordinary days, small moments of connection could touch the heart. She looked at Ethan, skipping ahead in the sunlight, and smiled faintly. The storm was gone, but something inside her had shifted, something small, something unspoken. She didn't know it yet. But that morning's warmth would stay with her long after they drove away from the Maplewood Inn. The drive home was quiet. filled with the soft hum of the tires and the rhythm of Ethan's gentle humming in the back seat. The storm had left everything fresh and bright. Sunlight glimmered on wet leaves, and puddles sparkled like tiny mirrors on the road. Linda held the steering wheel lightly, her mind far away. She kept thinking about the Maplewood Inn, about the quiet warmth of the fireplace, and about Daniel's kind smile when he handed her the wooden keychain. It wasn't a memory filled with romance, it was something gentler, deeper. A reminder of being seen. When they finally reached home, the old house felt bigger than before. Robert wasn't back yet. He'd called that morning to say his flight was delayed. Linda unpacked slowly, moving through the house with quiet steps. Ethan ran upstairs, laughing as he found his toys again. She smiled at the sound. It filled the empty space with life again. But as she set her bag down, the little maple leaf keychain slipped from her hand and landed on the table. For a moment, she just looked at it. It was such a simple thing, a smooth piece of wood shaped like a leaf, yet it carried warmth, like a piece of that hotel still clinging to her. That night, after dinner, Linda tucked Ethan into bed and sat alone in the living room. The rain had stopped completely, and the world outside was calm. She picked up her phone, scrolling absent-mindedly. But her mind wandered back to that soft voice, that sense of peace she'd felt talking to Daniel. It wasn't attraction. It was something harder to explain, like he'd seen through her loneliness without her saying a word. For years, she'd been a steady wife, a devoted mother, and now a loving grandmother. But somewhere along the way, she had become invisible. Robert loved her. She knew that. Yet love had grown quiet between them, a habit, not a feeling. They spoke politely, shared dinners, slept under the same roof, but rarely truly saw each other anymore. That night at the Maplewood Inn had reminded her what connection felt like. It wasn't about romance. It was about being heard. The next day, Robert returned. He walked through the door carrying his suitcase, tired but smiling. "You two survived without me, huh?" he said, setting his things down. Ethan ran to him, wrapping his arms around his leg. Linda stood in the doorway, smiling, though her heart felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. "We managed," she said softly. Robert looked around. "Everything looks the same." "How was the storm?" "Bad," she replied. "We stayed at the Maplewood Inn for a night. It was safer." He raised an eyebrow. "The Maplewood. That place still open. We went there once, didn't we? When Ethan's mom was little." "Yes." Linda said, a faint smile touching her lips. "It hasn't changed much. Still feels like a storybook place." He nodded distractedly, already checking his phone. "Good. I'm glad you and the boy were safe." Then he moved to his office to unpack. The conversation ended there, like so many had before. Short, polite, hollow. Linda sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the keychain again. The little maple leaf caught the afternoon light, its edges glowing softly. She turned it in her fingers, remembering Daniel's words. "I hope the next storm you face is only a small one." That night, she found herself sitting by the window, the same way she had in the hotel room. The air outside was still. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wet grass. She thought about how easy it had been to talk to a stranger, and how difficult it now felt to speak to her own husband. The realization hurt, but it also woke something inside her, a quiet, stubborn desire to fix what had gone silent. When Robert came to the living room later, she looked up and said softly, "How is Chicago?" He looked surprised by her tone. She hadn't asked that question in a long time. "Busy," he said after a pause. "Meetings all day, dinner with clients. The usual. Did you get any time to rest?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Not much. I missed home, though." She hesitated, then said, "We should go somewhere together sometime." "Just us." He looked at her, puzzled. "You mean like a trip?" "Yes," she said. "Maybe to the lake again. To Maplewood." Robert chuckled softly. "That old place? What brought that up?" Linda smiled. "I just remembered how peaceful it was. I thought maybe it'd be nice to go there again, like we used to." For a moment, Robert said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "You know what? That doesn't sound bad. Maybe next weekend." Her heart lifted, even if just a little. I'd like that, she said quietly. Over the next few days, Linda noticed small things she hadn't seen before. Robert asked about her garden. He offered to help with dinner. Once, he even brought her a cup of tea without being asked. It wasn't much, but it was something like old warmth flickering back to life after years of silence. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from their porch, Robert said, "You seem different lately. Happier?" Linda looked out at the orange sky. "Maybe I just remembered how to breathe again," she said softly. He chuckled, not understanding fully, but smiled anyway. "Whatever it is, I'm glad." As the sun dipped below the trees, she thought about Daniel again, not with longing, but with gratitude. He hadn't entered her life to start something new. He had reminded her not to give up on what she already had. Sometimes life sends strangers not to change your path, but to help you see where you've lost your way. A week later, Robert kept his promise. They packed a small bag and drove back to the Maplewood Inn. Ethan stayed with his parents that weekend, so it was just the two of them. The same innkeeper greeted them. Daniel was there, standing by the counter. He looked surprised to see her, then smiled warmly. "Back again?" he asked. Linda smiled. "Told you it was peaceful here." Robert extended his hand politely. "My wife told me you took good care of them during the storm." "Thank you." Daniel shook his hand and said, "It was nothing, sir. Just glad they were safe." Later that evening, Linda and Robert sat by the same fireplace where she had sat before. The crackling sound filled the silence between them. This time it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt real, warm, shared. Robert looked at her and said quietly, "I forgot how nice it feels to just sit with you." Linda smiled, her heart full. "Me too," she whispered. That night, as they walked along the quiet lake under the stars, Linda felt at peace. Life wasn't perfect, and love didn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it was soft, a steady warmth that waited to be remembered, and when she went to bed that night, a maple leaf keychain resting on the nightstand, she knew the storm had given her more than fear and rain. It had given her a second chance, a reminder that even in the calm after the storm, love can still find its voice again. The next morning at the Maplewood Inn began with soft sunlight spilling across the room. The lake outside shimmered like glass, and the air smelled of pine and rain-soaked earth. Linda woke up slowly, hearing the quiet creak of the wooden floor and the distant hum of the breakfast hall below. Robert was still asleep beside her, breathing evenly, his face peaceful in a way she hadn't seen in years. For a moment she simply watched him, realizing how many mornings she had rushed through life without truly looking at him. They had grown older together. Yet somewhere along the way, they had stopped really seeing each other. She got dressed quietly and went down to the small dining area. Daniel was there, arranging fresh flowers in a vase near the window. He looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker. I didn't expect to see you back so soon." Linda returned a smile. "My husband and I decided to take a small trip. It seemed right to come back here." "I'm glad you did," Daniel said, stepping aside so she could reach the coffee pot. "You both looked tired last time. You deserve a little peace." She nodded, pouring herself a cup. "You were kind to us during the storm. I never really thanked you properly." "You don't need to," he said gently. "Sometimes people just need a safe place for a while." His words carried a quiet truth, and for a second, Linda felt the same warmth she had that first night. But now it felt different, lighter, settled, as if her heart understood where it truly belonged. "You were right," she said after a pause. "That night helped me see things more clearly." Daniel looked curious. "About what?" She smiled softly. "About love. About how easy it is to let silence take over if you're not careful." He nodded slowly. "Most people don't realize it until it's too late." Before she could reply, Robert appeared behind her, dressed and smiling faintly. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, slipping his hand around her shoulder. "Smells like fresh coffee." Linda handed him a cup. "It's strong, just how you like it." Daniel excused himself politely, returning to his work. Linda and Robert sat together by the window, the morning light falling over them. Outside, the lake glowed under the soft sun. They ate quietly for a while until Robert said, You were right about coming here. I'd forgotten how peaceful it feels." She nodded. "It reminds me of when we were younger," he chuckled. "Back when we thought we had everything figured out." Linda smiled at that, then looked out the window. "Maybe we still can. Maybe it's not too late to start listening to each other again." Robert set his cup down, studying her face. "You know," he said softly, "I think I stopped listening long before I realized it. I'm sorry for that." His honesty caught her off guard. For years she had carried quiet hurt, believing he no longer cared as he once did. Hearing him say those words lifted something inside her. "I didn't make it easy either," she admitted. "Sometimes I built walls because I thought you wouldn't notice." He reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "Then maybe we can start over. We've both been standing in the same house, but on different sides of the room." Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. "I'd like that," she said simply. After breakfast, they walked down to the lake. The water was calm, only small ripples moving across the surface. Linda took off her shoes and let her feet sink into the cool sand. Robert laughed softly. "You haven't done that in years," she smiled. "Then maybe it's time to start again." They stood there together, letting the breeze wash over them. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic moments, just the peaceful silence of two people remembering what had been forgotten. For the first time in a long while, Linda felt at home next to him. Later, as they packed their things to leave, she saw Daniel by the front desk again. He waved goodbye politely, and Linda walked over. "Thank you, Daniel," she said warmly, "for everything. You probably don't realize how much that one night meant." He smiled, that same gentle expression that had stayed in her memory. "I think I do," he said. "I see it in your eyes. You look lighter now." She nodded. "I am." He handed her a fresh flower from the vase beside him, a small white daisy. "For the road," he said. She took it, smiling. "Goodbye, Daniel. Goodbye, Mrs. Parker. Take care of each other." When she turned to leave, Robert was holding the door open, watching her. "You ready?" he asked. "I am," she said softly. The drive back home felt different this time. The roads were the same, the trees still golden from the season's change, but the silence between them was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Robert reached over at one point and placed his hand on hers. She squeezed it gently, neither of them saying a word. Some things didn't need words anymore. When they reached home, Linda went straight to her favorite window, the one overlooking the garden. She set the small daisy and a glass of water on the sill and placed the wooden maple leaf keychain beside it. The two small tokens, simple, ordinary, minded her of something extraordinary. How one storm and a stranger's kindness had helped her find her way back to her own life. That evening, as she and Robert sat on the porch watching the sunset, she thought about how love changes over time. It doesn't always burn bright. Sometimes it flickers softly, waiting for a bit of care to glow again. She turned to him and said, "Do you remember the first time we came here? The way we used to laugh at nothing?" He smiled, eyes distant with memory. "I do. I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive." Linda reached for his hand again. "Then maybe it's time we remind each other why." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I'd like that." The air grew cooler and the world outside turned golden as the sun dipped behind the trees. They didn't need to speak anymore. Everything that needed to be said was already there in the small gestures, in the quiet smiles, in the simple act of being together. Asterisk.